Welcome back to the programme. Tonight we're joined by Andrew Holder from TDA Interiors and Rob Morris from Space Consulting, and we're talking all about buying, renting and leasing commercial property. So if you've got a question about something similar, give us a call on 1300 30 34 35 or send us an email to property@skynews.com.au. So now we're going to start talking about commercial property and the fit-outs, and I guess the first question to Andrew is, we talked before about renovations kind of doubling in value. How important are the numbers when it comes to commercial?
Very important. You've got to really budget ahead. As we talked about earlier, it's a big capital outlay of fit-out, so you've really got to be planning ahead. The spend is really dependent on the building you're going to select. So typically what we've seen over the last few years, there's a lot of fitted out space on the market. So the budgets that you need for those sort of buildings that already have a tenancy fit out in them would be less. So if you select a building like that, the budget obviously will be less. But if you're taking a developer spec building with maybe a suspended ceiling and a carpeted floor, an open floor plate, you're going to be up for that $1,000 a square metre. So that's going to that's got to be planned for.
Yeah. And so what are the things that some people get wrong? So if they're just kind of getting into business for the first time, or they're moving out from home into starting to get into the city, what are some of the things that people kind of may not estimate right, or just not be completely aware of, that they're getting into a new thing?
Well, I think one of the common misconceptions is where the value of the fit-out is. Typically about 50% of the cost of a fit-out will be in the building services, in the air conditioning, and the lighting, and the IT infrastructure, and the fire services. And they're all things that people generally don't budget for, or budget less for anyway. The rest of the spend is really on the aesthetics, the selection of the furniture and the colours and everything else. So 50% of the cost is really almost unseen work. So when people walk into an office interior, they go, well, are we going to actually have a situation where there's going to be enough budget available to cope with all these things?
So a lot of it can literally just be blank concrete and there's absolutely nothing in there whatsoever.
Absolutely, yeah. The other thing to say is that poor design, in that if you're over designing an office interior, if you've got if you brought a glamorous designer in to create a masterpiece for you, that can cost a lot of money. So the selection of a designer becomes very important.
So where do people really start? Like, if they're taking their first step into moving into commercial premises, like, do you start with an architect or a designer, or where?
Typically you'd start
or just come to you?
Well, yeah, coming to us would be one option. We'd then go to a designer and form the right team for the client. Selecting the right designer, as I said, is probably the key to getting it right. Designers out there, some of them are competent at designing call centre space, some of them are competent at designing accountancy or legal space. So really selecting the right designer that understands your budget, that's probably the key to the whole thing.
Is it similar with architects? And maybe we'll get some architects ringing up and abusing me, but quite often I find with architects with residential is they may produce something that looks absolutely fantastic, but certainly if you're doing it from an investor's perspective, they won't necessarily cost justify everything to say, well, this is going to cost you 200 grand to do, but it's only going to add 100 grand's worth of value. But it's going to look sexy. They won't
know. They won't have those answers. No, absolutely. And their vocation is to design, create the masterpiece of the office, and they want their statement to be in the design. So their talents don't usually lay with what things cost, unfortunately.
Sure. And when it comes to approvals, say for council approvals, can you go in with these office spaces and, as long as you're not changing the outside, do whatever you want, or?
It's a bit more involved than that. I mean, that's where some of the planning becomes very important. You've got, there's two main approvals you need. You need approval from the landlord of the building to do the work, and that's the signature on a piece of paper. But that's very important, because without that you can't then go and gain council approval for the fit-out. And the council approval is not straightforward either. The council will look at, which is a standard DA type arrangement. The council, in the same way a residential DA would happen. The council will look at things like the fire escape distances, the fire alarm equipment, the general layout of the space, the density of the space. So they'll be looking for, in the event of fire, what would happen. And all those things come with a price tag.
And so, Rob, does all this get done as part of the lease negotiation? Because what if you then go and sign the lease and you've got all these grand plans, you sign the lease, you move in, you start doing all the work, and the landlord says, no, well, you're not going to do any of that kind of stuff?
Yeah, look, very much so. I mean, I work with people like Andrew all the time in terms of the upfront planning, and I can do so much in terms of negotiating the lease, but when we get to the stage where we are looking at one or two properties where the client has actually said, yep, look, let's drive the negotiations on this one. The information that Andrew provides is key to the negotiations. If they only have a budget of 500,000, as Andrew said, a designer goes away and does a massive fit out for, you know, $1 million, it's just never going to work. So we have to try and dovetail the client's expectations with their budget and also what may or may not be available from the landlord. So we all work pretty closely together.
And so you're basically all moving at the same kind of pace at the same time to try and tie it all up at the same time?
Absolutely. We're all working towards the goal of getting the client the property at the best price. From my side, financially, on the commercial lease, from Andrew's side, giving them a fit out that actually ties in with their expectations and what they can afford, because sometimes they'll, as Andrew I'm sure will say, they go and see amazing fit outs and want the same but haven't got the budget to actually go there. And
so how long do these negotiations take? Because it sounds a pretty complicated process.
Yeah, look, it can be very lengthy. It depends on response times from landlords and also on my side from my clients, but it can take quite a long time. I mean, what I generally do with a client as a rule of thumb is ideally go out to the market for them about 12 months before their lease expiry. That's on a sort of fairly substantial space. That gives them the time to inspect and fine-tune and refine the search and negotiate, and also the design process takes a long time, but smaller spaces obviously less time. But for anyone watching, I wouldn't say leave it less than 6 months, because otherwise you then become it becomes very hard to negotiate with the landlord then, because he knows you haven't got any time, and you weaken your negotiating position the closer you get to your expiry. So it's all about planning.
And so if it's costing that much to fit out a place and to actually physically move, how long are the leases? Because they're quite different to the residential ones, aren't they? Yeah,
typically you're looking at a 5-year lease. They can go up or down, can go up to 7, can go up to 10, with options built into those leases. So they're further lease terms, usually of 3 years or 5 years.
Because how does the option thing work? Because quite often the people refer to it as like a 3x3x3 or something, don't they?
That's right.
So what does that mean?
Well, that basically means you have an initial 3 term, and then you'll have 2 periods of 3-year options. So basically what they'll use is the existing lease format. You renew at the end of the final year at whatever the market rent is at that year, and you carry on for a further 3 years. So it gives the tenant some security that they've got the option to stay. From a landlord's perspective and from an investment perspective, it doesn't really mean an awful lot, because that tenant can still turn around and go. But it's only something to build in if you can. But the point to make, I think, is you can also go lower than 5. If you're a small business and you're moving out of a serviced office and it's your first office, and I've done the same thing myself, you think, I can't commit to 5 years. So you can with the right landlord and the right building, 2 years or 3 years. You know, if you go 2 years and then have an option for 1 year, or even a 2-year with some break provisions after a year if you're really not sure. So all of that flexibility, you need to be asking for.
Sure. So, Andrew, what other kind of people do you need on your team if you're looking at fit-outs, renting a space? So you've obviously got your kind of designer, you've got a lease negotiator, who else?
Well, again, it depends on the scale of the project, but if there's a multi-building project where you've got maybe a big corporate moving from several buildings into one, that would typically attract an independent project manager who would need to coordinate all the stakeholders and make sure the job is unfolding in the right way. Most of the work we do falls sort of under the 3,000 square metre mark, so typically an office that would occupy about 300 staff. And in that sort of space, really the designer working closely with the construction manager is a good solution for a client. Really, you're avoiding that middle fee.
Right, OK. And when it comes to trying to sort the budgets out, worth getting your accountant and other advisors on the team as well to really work out the numbers? Or is that something that generally a specialist like yourself would do?
Well, Rob really steps in with, the lease negotiations, and the lease costs are very closely linked to the fit-out costs at the beginning of the lease, because as we talked about earlier, the client's trying to work out what its overall spend is going to be for the period of the lease, which includes the fit-out costs, any incentive that's been offered, and the lease costs for the term of the lease. So the whole thing's a bit of a jigsaw puzzle that works through from the lease advisor through to the contractor that does the work.
Sure, sounds good. Now we'll jump to the phone lines. Now we've got Joe from Maroubra on the phone. Welcome, Joe.
Hello?
Hi, Joe. How are you?
Is this Chris?
Yeah, hi.
Hi, Chris. I've got a question. We're looking at leasing some land which is already DA approved for our type of business. Now, it requires us to build from the ground up, and we were just wondering what sorry, what key issues to look out for would be in a deal like this.
Right, okay, so you've got a block of land, it's already DA approved.
Already DA approved for our type of business.
Right, okay. So, any ideas, guys? Some of the complications at all?
Well, we're generally not involved in ground-up construction, so couldn't really give any advice. Sorry about that.
Yep.
Yeah, look, I'm probably the same. It's,
Right, okay.
if it's not an existing building, it's hard to come in.
So generally, it's kind of going direct to a builder, is it, to work on that stuff rather than the fit-out?
Well, certainly, I think probably the starting point would be an architect again.
Yeah.
It wouldn't, with an office interior, it would be an interior designer, but with a new build project, it would be an architect.
Yeah.
Just to see what the feasibility on the construction would be.
Right, okay. So sorry about that, Joe. We'll have to catch you on another one for that. But yeah, probably more of a builder that can do the whole lot rather than these interior guys. But thanks for the call anyway. Now, joining me on the panel of experts tonight is Andrew Holder from TDA Interiors and Rob Morris from Space Consulting. If you've got a question or want to join the discussion, number to call 1300 30 34 35 or send us an email to property@skynews.com.au. We'll be back in just a minute.